So now that we've looked at how the nCloth works, how it collides, and how you kind of change the settings for that cloth, now we're going to look at how we can make that cloth follow other objects. Because you don't always want it to just be a piece of cloth that falls or is affected by wind. Sometimes you want it to follow other objects. So I'm going to go ahead and create my plane. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to give it some more subdivisions and move it over a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a polygon sphere. And I will name you Bob. Hi, Bob. Well, old Bob, he falls into a vat of nuclear waste. You know how often that happens. And of course, once you fall into nuclear waste, you become Super Bob. Dun da da. And of course, Super Bob needs his cape. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this into nCloth. And if I hit play, let me give myself some more time down here. You'll see it falls. You are nCloth. So now I want to make this nCloth follow Super Bob. Now all the constraints you've learned so far don't work with nCloth, with dynamics. We have a whole new set called nConstraints. You'll see we can create different types. You have component, component to component, force field, point to surface, slide on surface, transform constraint. The two main ones I use are transform constraint or component to component. So let's start with the transform constraint. Basically, the way a transform constraint works is I'm just going to grab some verts here on my nCloth. Now it does need to be changed into nCloth before you use the nConstraints. And I'm going to make a transform constraint. Basically what a transform constraint does is it glues those verts to a locator. So now if I hit play, it's going to fall. Ha ha ha. And now this transform constraint, I can actually parent to Bob. Just hit P to parent. And it basically glues that locator to Bob. So now that cape is going to follow Bob. Now you notice if I move him in the viewport, it doesn't follow. Well, remember, dynamics need time to work. The timeline isn't moving. There's no time, so it can't follow Bob. Now if I set keys on it, it'll follow Bob. So if I set a key here, and then go up here and set a key, and then hit play, you'll see the cape is going to follow Bob. So that constraint is making the nCloth follow Bob. Now, that's kind of cool, but I don't always want to have to set keys to test my cloth, see how it's going to follow. So I'm going to get rid of these keys. I'm just going to select them all and say break connections. And I want the ability to be able to move Bob in the viewport and see how that nCloth is going to affect it. Now they give you an option. Under field solvers, you have what's called interactive playback. I'm going to go ahead and make a shelf button for it. It gives you this cool little arrow. What that allows you to do is if I hit play, you'll see the timeline is moving, but I can also still move Bob. Zoom. Zoom. Super Bob. Defender of spheres everywhere. So that's pretty cool, isn't it? And that cloth is really stretchy. Stop. Rewind. So that interactive playback allows you to actually move it in the viewport while the timeline is playing. Gives you the best of both worlds. But this constraint really isn't looking like much of a cape, is it? It's looking pretty basic. It's just kind of, ooh, now it's wigging out. Dynamics do wig out. Just usually hit rewind and play again. It'll fix itself. So, yeah, it's following them. Yeah, it looks kind of like a cape, but let's see if we can do better. So I'm going to get rid of this dynamic constraint. But you don't just want to hit delete on dynamic things. It can leave behind phantom stuff that can mess you up. Under nConstraint, they have remove dynamic constraint. That'll get rid of it the right way. So how else can we do this? Well, maybe I could make two transform constraints. Now if I hit play, you'll see I get that epaulette look. So that's kind of cool. A little bit better. But let's see if we can do better still. So I'm going to get rid of these dynamic constraints. And the next one we're going to look at is component to component. So I'm going to select the verts. And I'm also going to select verts on Bob. And then I'm going to go to nConstraint, component to component. What that's going to make is these cool little green dots. Now, what do those kind of look like? The same thing we're dealing with our nCloth. Springs. Ha ha ha. If I hit play, you'll see now we get some cool springy action. So now we're starting to get somewhere, aren't we? Stop. So let's actually look at that dynamic constraint, because there's a couple settings in here we can kind of work with too. Under dynamic constraint attributes, we have constrain method. You have weld, spring, rubber band. Whoever did nCloth and set up nCloth in Maya was awesome, because everything actually makes sense in their naming. Rubber band, it's going to be the springiest. Spring is going to be the middle. Weld is going to weld those guys together. Now be careful with weld. It's going to literally weld those guys together. If this is a passive collider, which you'd probably want to set up so the cape would hit with it, it can make verts on the inside and the outside of the passive collider. That will make Maya crash, because it doesn't know which way to calculate things. If you have verts on the inside and the outside of a passive collider, Maya will do very bad things. So keep that in mind. Weld can be cool, but it can crash your system. But spring and rubber band are the basic ones. And then you have component method. Right now it's set to nearest pair. If I set that to component order, it doesn't do much for me. But if I go to within max distance, I can actually change that max distance. If I needed more springs, I can change that to make it more springs. But remember, with more springs, you're going to get a stiffer look, because there's more springs to deal with. But the cool thing about using max distance is I can also set the connection density. So I can kind of change how it's making the springs and then cut out some of the springs. So these are just different attributes you can play around with to get the look you want. You'll see it's going through old Bob right here. But like I said, I can make Bob into a passive collider. And now it'll interact with Bob and it won't pop through him. Doo-doo-doo. Pretty cool, huh? So let's look at another example of nCloth, and we can look at a different kind of constraint. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a polygon plane. And I'm going to up its density. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple of transform constraints. So I'm going to make a transform constraint. Make a transform constraint. If I hit play, I didn't make this an nCloth, did I? Doo-doo-doo. You're nCloth. Now I can do my transform constraints. Make a transform constraint. There we go. See, we make mistakes too every once in a while. Make a transform constraint. Now if I hit play, yay, I get a cool little hammock. So let's bring back Bob. Here we have old Bob. And he fell into another vat of nuclear waste, and it changed him back to plain old Bob. Poor Bob. But old Bob, he wants to have a vacation now. He's been working hard as a superhero. He's back to normal, wants to take a little vacation. So he wants to hang out on his hammock. Well, if I hit play right now, old Bob ain't going to do nothing. He's just a polygon object. But I can change Bob into an nCloth object too. Now when I hit play, Bob is going to hit his hammock. But poor old Bob, I just beat up Bob, don't I? He's all splattered out. It's because right now he's just an empty cloth shell. So that cloth is going to collapse on itself. So how can I help old Bob have a vacation? Well, let's go into his attributes. Let's go into his dynamic properties. And I'm just going to make him a rigid object and kick up his rigidity. Now if I hit play, old Bob's going to hang out on his hammock. And oh no! Oh, I ran out of time before he fell off. So, you can see how you can actually have objects interacting with other objects. And if you want to have some fun, let's bring back my outliner. There we go. If I select one of these dynamic constraints, and then I hit interactive playback, I can spring old Bob around. That got kind of messed up, didn't it? Let's try that again. Whoa, that constraint is wigging out. You can see how I can kind of spring old Bob around. Whoa! Let's see if I can catch him. Yep. Uh-oh. He's getting away from me. Come on! Get him! Get him! Get him! Oh, I got him! Yay! And he sprung again. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Now you notice how he kind of got caught up there a little bit. If you're dealing with something that's an action that fast and dealing with things like that, that's when you may want to go into the nucleus and play around with your solver attributes. If he's hitting and it's not calculating, that would be the substeps. Once he's hitting and you're having issues, that would be the max collision iterations. So you may need to turn that up a couple to make it interact a little bit better. So that's pretty cool and all, but let's look at one of my favorite constraints. I'm going to grab some verts here. And I'm going to go to nConstraint, and I'm going to make a terrible surface. Ha ha ha. What that's going to allow this cloth to do is actually tear. So if I hit play, you'll see that cloth will tear. That's pretty slick, isn't it? Now you notice it actually tore before Bob hit it. So I may need to go in and tweak that constraint a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the connection density range. And this is where you have strength and glue strength. Now the glue strength is what's holding it together. So if I kick this up a little bit, and this is pretty touchy. And it didn't even tear. Like I said, this is a pretty touchy variable. There we go. Now you see Bob was actually the action that tore the cloth. So that's dealing with the glue strength. So you can actually make surfaces that tear. That's pretty slick, isn't it? Like I said, the constraints I use the most are the component to component, transform, and then if I want the surface to tear, I'll be able to use the tearable surface. Cool? So one last demo. I'm going to go ahead and create Bob. And I'm going to kick up his density a little bit. Then I'm going to make old Bob into nCloth. You are nCloth. Yay! And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the whole thing a tearable surface. Oh. I'm going to turn that glue strength down a little bit. And then I'm going to go into the nucleus. And I'm going to give myself some wind. And let's see what happens to poor old Bob here. And this terrible surface needs to be turned down. Turn that glue strength down some more. And let's change this to -1 so it's blowing up. Still not blowing up. Come on. Go back into my dynamic constraint. There we go. Let's try that. Boom! There we go. That's what I was looking for. Poor old Bob. Bam! Ho ho ho! Oh, I beat up old Bob too bad. I like Bob. That's pretty slick, isn't it? So that's kind of the basics of the dynamic constraints, and that's how you can get things to follow other objects, have some fun, blow some stuff up, make things tear. So that's dealing with the end constraints. Now in the next video, we're actually going to bring in old Cave Troll and work on his loincloth and give him some jiggle using nCloth.